Let's Cover That podcast is brought to you by CM&F Group, professional liability services for over 200 healthcare professions. Visit our website at cmfgroup.com/podcast for more info.
Hey everyone, it's another episode of Let's Cover That, and I'm Will Sullivan.
And I'm Antonina Aguirre. And today we have with us Ned Palmer, co-founder and COO of Panacea Financial. Ned, it's great to have you on the podcast today. How's it going?
Going well. Thanks so much, Will. Thanks, Antonina. I really appreciate being here. Super excited for this.
Yeah, so are we. So Ned, tell us a little bit about your background in healthcare and kind of what led you to co-founding Panacea.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I am a practicing physician still here in Boston. I'm an internist and a pediatrician, so I'm dual boarded. So my training was about 8+ years, and then I went on to fellowship in global health, adding another couple of years, rounding it out to a solid 10. And the idea during that training that I underwent an extended period of time of not making more than $50,000, what we really began to realize, my co-founding partners and I, is that what is normal in medicine has really parted ways with an understanding of what should be normal or accepted within the traditional banking sector. And that means that you really end up with a lot of situations that are kind of square peg in a round hole. And that's cliche, but what it leads to is massive amounts of financial stress, massive amounts of insecurity, delayed adulthood, delayed being able to invest in things like buying your own home, investing in your own practice, being able to really live that fully fledged adult life is delayed by virtue of the training pipeline and the pathways that you go through, and it not being understood that that's what normal is. Normal, unfortunately, these days is $250,000 in debt before you ever see a paycheck, much less a fully baked either attending or in practice paycheck of any kind. Normal is in your early to mid 30s before you see any realistic income whatsoever. Your FICO score naturally, to your credit score, tends to take a hit with those kind of things. And so when you're trying to put somebody into a very rigid consumer bucket like that to understand their level of risk, it's often misattributed or mispriced. And that financial stress, financial harm that comes to people in our community, doctors, causes a lot of really negative downstream effects: burnout, loss of resiliency, and just stress, unhappiness. And it's kind of the worst thing that you could have if you were to design a healthcare program and be, you know who I want? I want my doctor thinking about when his next paycheck's coming from. That's where I want their focus to be, So it was a problem that we lived. And then as we started to understand it better, we realized that it wasn't unique to us, and it really affected our entire community. And that's the genesis of where Panacea came from. It's trying to solve this problem for our community.
Yeah, that's amazing. So when you talk about it, Ned, so what is the average physician's walking out the door with $250,000 of debt?
Yeah, so the numbers for this year is that if you graduate with an MD, you're likely to graduate with $203,000. If you graduate with a DO, $259,000 the day that you graduate. A dental degree is $298,000 on the day that you graduate. And veterinary medicine is right in between there at around $260,000. And that's the day you graduate. So if you then go into further training where you're deferring that, that's adding interest. So I graduated, I was lucky. I didn't graduate with $200,000. I graduated with $301,000 in debt the day that I graduated. I added $97,000 of accrued interest during my 6 years of training program. That number doesn't freeze. This is before COVID, admittedly, but that number doesn't freeze. And so even that number at graduation really misrepresents the reality of the debt burden for a lot of these borrowers.
So when you're looking at the debt burden, especially, like you said, Ned, you're going through a 10-year process, in your 20s into potentially even your early mid 30s, if you start quick enough after undergrad. What are the type of stories you've heard where there's that gap of understanding where you're looking at the large financial institutions and you're trying to, I'm just thinking about going to law school, and I did 4 years, and I definitely understand that level of debt that you have and trying to tackle that versus I think the average debt of a graduate from undergrad in the country is 20, 30 grand. So I mean, you're looking at like a massive swath of difference between all of you who are taking care of us and the rest of the population. But I mean, what are like practical issues of that? Like you're trying to get a loan for a car for this new residency that's on the other side of Boston that you can't get to on a commuter shuttle, on a train, or what does that look like practically speaking?
Absolutely. So one of the most commonly used metrics, and just to identify it, is debt to income ratio.
Hmm.
It is used all the time. You'll hear it. It's DTI this. In consumer underwriting, it is really central to a lot of how that works. And what it looks at is all debt. Just debt is debt is debt. And that right there, that metric, I think, is one of the more harmful approaches to these high-level professional careers. Because, Will, like yourself, when you're going to law school, $200,000 in debt to go to law school is not the same as $200,000 because of a very challenging weekend in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Those are wildly different debts, right? You took $200,000 and didn't blow it on the roulette table. I don't know what your game is, but on the roulette tables or blackjack tables. But instead, you invested $200,000 in yourself, in your future income, in your employability, in a high-level professional doctorate level degree that is very different. And so debt is not debt, right? There are wildly different approaches to this, but when you start to take metrics like the debt to the income ratio, you massively misrepresent borrowers and misunderstand what their risk is. You require things totally out of step. You're asking now people in their mid-30s with doctorate degrees to get cosigners because they've fallen outside of this magical box. And that debt as kind of the top line, your debt to income ratio, when you leave with $250,000 of that before you've ever had anything, your debt to income ratio is upside down. It's 5 to 1, right? I graduated, I started residency, I owed $250,000. I was making $50,000. I was so far upside down. It wasn't that I was outside the box. It was like these numbers don't even make like calculable sense in terms of how they're interpreted. And so just that top line item, like traditional entities regarding debt as debt as debt, is really one of the most challenging and I think harmful things to entire communities. And you miss that nuance of debt is a fantastic way to invest yourself, right? Even that $200,000 for school is different than $200,000 in debt that you took out to buy a house. And so there's this lack of nuance and lack of understanding about what different debts can mean. And when you lose that, you really lose the capacity to meet communities at what their needs are. And that's where it leads to a lot of stress and harm and frustration.
So, Ned, that all sounds great. And I think, what we would like to really understand is how does Panacea differentiate from other borrowers and lenders? And what kind of impact is that having on the people that, come to you and use your platform?
Panacea is hyper focused on one group, and it's a group that we understand. And this is a group of physicians, dentists, veterinarians, and podiatrists in the United States. All in, in a country of about 340, 350 million people, we're looking at 1.5 million of them. That is both a large number and a small number, depending on kind of how you decide to slice it. By staying hyper focused on this niche group, and a group really that we understand critically because we've been through this pathway with them. We've been in the same mud, so to speak, going through this. We can design and build everything for this group. We don't have to try to include every single possible permutation or variation. We can say, this is a product for a physician in training. That's it. It's not for everybody in training. It's not for everybody who's ever been to school. We don't have to try to paint with these broad brushes. We can be so specific and targeted that our products are designed exactly for this community in the best possible way that we, with expert advice, was able to build these products. Our underwriting is in recognition of what it took to get to be there. It's in recognition of the maturity and the responsibility that comes with getting doctorate level healthcare education. And then on the servicing side, we're able to service everything in recognition of what our customers need. And so before we even had any customers, we had a 24/7 call center based in Virginia because we know that healthcare runs around the clock. we know that being able to meet our customers who run around the clock, they operate 24/7, 365. We need to be there for them whenever they are asking for the help and for the accessibility. And so we had that before we even had a customer. We had the call center because we knew it was central to what we're doing to be there to support our customers whenever they need it. It's not, healthcare is not Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 by any stretch of the imagination. And we knew that meeting this level, meeting this community of borrowers, we'd never be able to connect with them if we didn't recognize what their lived experience is. And their lived experience is this: it's working around the clock, it's being available on holidays, it's finding 5 minutes between patients and having some person that you can call that will actually take the next steps forward. It's really making use of all of that time, protecting the doctor's time, and then respecting them as borrowers. And trying to build all of our products and services in this entire cycle that we have around the doctorate.
And the cycle of products that you guys have, Ned, is going from all the way from the student all the way up to, hey, I'm gonna buy into this surgery center or this new physician practice, veterinarian practice, and get a loan from you all to kind of facilitate that. Whereas, you might be 5 years out, but still have 100, 200 grand in debt if you're like you and you did 10 years of it all. And, you have that debt, the income ratio, but now you're in an opportunity to buy. Most partners aren't going to sit there and say, all right, we'll wait 3 more years or help you pay off your loans and things like that. So you guys kind of deal with the whole life cycle from the student all the way into becoming business partners, right?
Yeah, we'll start in that last year of your healthcare training. And there's a couple reasons for that. Really, the central reason is that last year is the most expensive and you're out of money or access to money. Your federal loans are capped. Every year they're capped at a certain amount. And they don't give you more in that last year. It's the same amount you had in years prior. And what you need to do in your fourth year in preparation for taking the next steps is apply, interview. If you're like me, you have to buy a new suit. I needed to travel around the country. I took 20 interviews all over the country. I then had to move. I had to pay for licensure. I had to start applying for board exams and more examinations. I spent an extra probably $15,000 to $18,000 in my last year of training. I had no access to that funding. It wasn't coming from the federal government. I had tapped out of my student loans. That was all already spoken for because I was living the same life I had the 3 years prior.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm talking about putting $10,000, $15,000 on credit cards. And then now I'm paying those off when I'm a resident, a big time resident making $50,000, trying to pay off $10,000 in credit card debt. So we start in that final year of healthcare training because we recognize that is, again, normal to have to go through these expenses. You can't get a residency without applying, without interviewing, without flying around for, without finding a new suit. These are things that are required of you, but there's no support for. And so we wanted to be there in recognition of what it takes to get to the next step, to help them invest in that next step, getting to residency, getting through residency, and then getting out into practice, where we are thrilled to continue to be with the life cycle of these borrowers and be their first choice when they need to buy into a surgical center, open up their own practice, build it from the ground up. Really anything that they need to do when they transition from the doctor as person to the doctor as a business. That's a really critical transition that a lot of our borrowers go through, and we absolutely want to be there to support them then as well. Because even our commercial products are designed and built with the doctor at the center, taking away a lot of this. In the same way that we'd say like careers outside of medicine aren't, you shouldn't be regarded. Debt is not debt is not debt. A restaurant is not a dental practice. A dental practice is not the same as a hotel. And if you try to use these same broad brush metrics, you don't just miss out on opportunities. You really create a much worse experience for the person who's trying to go through it. And this person, again, is the doctor providing care for someone you might love and want to receive good care. So it's really trying to take those extra steps to get to a point where that doctor is focused on what they've done the 10 years of training on, and not their next check, whether they're going to be able to make payroll this month. Do they have anybody helping and supporting them financially in recognition of what they've been through?
Ned, one of the things I think is really crucial to understand, especially going through the pandemic, and really, For over a decade now, it's like the mergers and acquisitions, just the gobbling up of physician practices that have gone on throughout the country. I think one of the things that's unique is that Panacea places itself in support of the doctor, whether employed or independent, startup, kind of perpetuating a business as a new partner. A lot of people are talking about how many docs are actually going to stay independent and kind of be more entrepreneurial. And you yourself being a doctor and being entrepreneurial, kind of with your practice as well as business. Yeah, how do you see yourselves as a business supporting in the future for doctors to kind of maintain autonomy or networks of practice rather than just being gobbled up by private equity or larger health systems? How do you see Panacea kind of playing in that gap there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So I'll start with the macro, really what we've seen from the industry, capital T, capital H, the healthcare industry. Um, and it really does go back now 12 years ago, I guess, under the ACA, Obamacare did a lot right.
Hmm.
Uh, this isn't this, there was a lot done in there. There was a lot of shoring up of the healthcare industry that badly needed to be done. It created incentives for this verticalization, though. And so private equity is a new change, but even starting 12 years ago, there were a lot of incentives for hospitals and healthcare systems to go out and buy up small shops, single provider, two and three small multi-practice providers, and start rolling them in, strengthening up these referral networks. It
Hmm.
makes good business sense. And the ACO, as they started to establish ACOs, accountable care organizations, um, and started to increase their actual incentives, their payouts and their bonuses from the insurance companies. And so that's kicked off about 10, 12 years ago. Now, over the same time period, is Will, you mentioned, private equity has really been ramping up and following that same model. Networks, clusters, centralizing back offices and letting doctors practice out individually. This has all been happening. In some places with some success. I can't say it's all been uniquely bad. However, a lot of it has been bad. And what we've seen now, I mean, and I'm not saying that I'm saying it because it's been on the cover of the New York Times because it's been bad. This isn't my own personal. I'm not taking a claim in this, but private equity, especially in the realms of emergency medicine, surgical center ownership, and some of these other arenas, have not provided what we want at the end of the day, which is patient-centered care with the doctor focused on being at bedside and them receiving the highest quality of care possible. It's turned medicine it's widgetized medicine. And that now these are units, these are pieces being sold and administered, and everything is metric driven in a way that metrics aren't humans, and cells on a spreadsheet are never going to be the patient sitting in front of you, and life is always more complicated than that. And so it's left a lot of kind of that even pre-pandemic was really happening. Now pandemic accelerating what we've heard out these words that we're all now so familiar with, this mass physician resignations, burnout, loss of resiliency. There was a study put forward by Jackson Physician Search that over 56% of physicians are looking at alternate employment after the pandemic. And that is not as nuanced as they're not leaving medicine, but they're unhappy. So every other physician is looking for a change. And that was about 8 months ago, 10 months ago, I think that study was actually published, right? So we're really seeing people, these doctors, starting to raise their hands and say, like, I am not happy with the status quo anymore. I probably wasn't before, but we're really approaching this kind of this idea of this like mass tipping point. Now, our goal is to keep physicians independent in as much as they can be. We want doctors, so physicians, dentists, and veterinarians. We want them to be able to be small business owners, run their own shop. We want them to be profitable. We want to help them find ways in which the financial side of things isn't the burden that drags them down. There will always be policy changes that we're all going to be left scrabbling to kind of back up and understand. But the financial side of it shouldn't be that. The financial side should be where it makes your life easier. Running your payroll should be easy. Processing your payments to make sure that when people are standing in front of you trying to pay you for the services that you're providing, you do that seamlessly, and it's never in the way. It's in addition to. It's never a hurdle. It's an additive. And so we have tried to design our entire financial services package, right, which helps you run your business as a business as well as financing it as you need it, to remove those hurdles, to keep you independent for as long as possible. We also partner with, we recognize that it takes, sorry, I'm going to try that again from, we also partner with, sorry, editor, sorry. So we also recognize that it takes a team, right? Like entrepreneurship there's really still this vision of like, oh, it's one, person. It's never that. There's a team, right? Our Panacea Financial was founded by three of us, but each one of us individually never could have done it. It took all three of us pulling everything that we had. That is true when you're running any business, and whether that is a dental practice or medical practice, surgical center, like you need a team. And that team includes, we hope, of course, Panacea Financial with the financials. We have entire teams of people who are vetted, who are lawyers, who work in the space, much like our own Will Sullivan, who work in the space of practice transitions. We have consultants who help, whose focus isn't on consulting to make you widgetized and better and to turn you into the same PE shop. It's consultants who their entire mission and goal is to keep you independent. And that means strengthening your bottom line, finding low loss opportunities to shore up and reduce your overhead, and make sure that you stay where you want to be. And so it's this recognition that Panacea Financial, we obviously want to be central to this relationship because it's money, and money often is. But we also, by virtue of that, know a lot of brilliant people in the space who are pulling for the same end goals that we think that these doctors are as well, which is to stay independent, stay at bedside, and keep treating patients for as long as they can in as much capacity as they want to, and return that independence and autonomy to their practice instead of feeling the yoke, so to speak, of having been chained up by private equity or some of these other loan structures or ownership structures that are more onerous than liberating.
Ned, everything you guys are doing at Panacea is truly impactful to the healthcare industry. It's so insightful and mindful for you guys to consider the fact that these practitioners have this burden of stress, and how could they potentially, practice every day wholeheartedly if they're so burdened in their everyday life. And so everything you're doing is super great, and we're really happy to hear about everything you're pushing out. And so we hope our listeners will tune in and check out the platform. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Ned. Amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me here at Slice of Healthcare on Let's Cover That. Really glad to be here.